Hello, we are back with Prosa with Bertaglia, and the Prosa today is in English, so it will be really fantastic because the subject we are bringing here is something that people are very interested right now. Why is blockchain important for supply chain professionals? Supply chain data is not always transparent, available, or reliable. And as we know, in times of disruption, available data is not enough. And this matters more than ever. Clients and the consumers demand brands to guarantee product authenticity, while supply chain ecosystem demand responsible and responsive sourcing and the better visibility to minimize risks. Blockchain for supply chain help organizations and their leaders use data to handle today's disruptions and build the resilience for the future. Let's reflect on this fantastic subject here in Prosa con Bertaglia. And for this conversation, I will have the privilege to bring it to this stage, Erik Valiquette. Oh, I'm very proud to have here Erik Valiquette to contribute with Prosa with Bertaglia, or Prosa con Bertaglia. Erik, my friend, welcome to Prosa con Bertaglia.
Good morning. It's so nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Great, Erik. I think you are going to have or bring a very good contribution about blockchain here in Prosa with Bertaglia. But before going to the Prosa, I would like to know who is Erik Valiquette?
Well, so Erik is a logistics professional. I come from the logistics world. I've been in the industry for about 30 years, which kind of explains my haircut. My background is with freight forwarding and customs brokerage. So supply chains, right? They've been global for a long time. Everything we have around us comes from somewhere else. Our clothes, our food, our computers that we look at all day long, our cell phones, our mobile phones, they all come from somewhere. And the logistics professional moves that freight all over the world. And that's my background. I am also the CEO of the Blockchain Supply Chain Association, and we can discuss what our association does as well.
Wow, great, Erik, great. Erik, let me invite people to subscribe in the channel and give us your like and their support for this magnificent conversation we are going to have here. So I would like to have an introduction here about the subject, because I think this subject is really very important here. Can you do that, Erik, for us?
It's my great pleasure. When you hear the word blockchain, what do you think about the first, right? Most people, when they hear blockchain, they hear Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, right? But that's not the fact. There is a technology, distributed ledger technology and blockchain, that's behind cryptocurrencies. It's the foundational technology that cryptocurrencies use, but it can be used for so much more. And especially in supply chain, it can be a very powerful tool.
Great. And Erik, as far as I know, you have, you mentioned already, you are the CEO of the BSCA, which is a Blockchain Supply Chain Association. So tell us a bit more about this association, Erik, because I understood. Let me tell you that Elcio Gracia is a very friend of mine, and Elcio is part of your team somehow doing here in Latin America or South America. You can explain later on which countries you are in. So tell us a bit about the Blockchain Supply Chain Association, Erik.
My pleasure. And yes, we're so happy to have Elcio join our association. He's representing our chapter in Brazil and the eastern part of Latin America. We also have a chapter in the northwestern parts of Colombia, Chile, Ecuador, Peru. I was down in Ecuador last year, which was beautiful. My first time in Latin America. Hopefully not the last, though. and we've been growing. So we started our association in 2019 here in Canada because we wanted to bring education to supply chain professionals like myself who wanted to understand this beautiful technology. Again, like I mentioned earlier, when you hear blockchain, you hear Bitcoin, right? Or most people do, and that's not the case. So we created the association to help supply chain professionals understand. And we do that in 3 ways. We do some advocacy work. So we talk with policymakers, and that can mean government, people who impact supply chain, right? Like customs or food inspection agencies, or health inspection agencies, or transportation agencies, but also other policymakers, if we want to call them like that, people like standards creators, right? You have people like the International Standards Organization who create standards, and we want to be involved in the discussions. I am currently the chair of the Canadian Mirror Committee to TC 307, which is establishing blockchain standards at ISO. So 200 countries around the world, all discussing, like the United Nations, but creating standards so that business can have it easier when they want to adopt a certain technology or a certain process. So we talk with these people. The second thing we do, of course, is my favorite word, collaboration, meaning working together or introducing partners, putting resources together to work on specific projects. So we get directly involved. We're not just talk, we get directly involved. And of course, a third thing we do is education, because we still need a lot of education on this topic, from our newsletters to webinars, to great shows like yours who will tackle supply chain issues. We created a course for supply chain professionals. And a little side note, we're translating that course into Spanish, hopefully one day into Portuguese, so that your supply chain professionals can take this course as well. Different workshops, so anything to help logistics and supply chain professionals understand the foundation of this technology. Again, I mentioned that we started here in Canada 2019, 2 chapters in Latin America, 1 in the United States, 1 in Europe, 2 in Africa for the moment, and we're opening 1 up in Australia, New Zealand. So again, supply chains are global. The interest for blockchain and DLT is global. So why not have a global association to help professionals around the world?
Wow, great, Eric. You know, this channel, this YouTube channel, Prosa con Bertaglia, the main objective we have here is really to seed and disseminate, spread out the education and the knowledge over supply chain, not just your supply chain. We talk about logistics, leadership, everything that is connected with the corporation or related to some function or process inside the corporation. We also talk about the technology you are going to talk, because blockchain is somehow very connected with the technology. So that's the point. And the other question that I would have here for you, Eric, is you talked about education webinars, but when people need to go through and define your association, how they can do that?
The best way is absolutely our website. So if you go to BSCA, Blockchain Supply Chain Association.global, you'll have all the information. You'll see our chapters. You can become a member. You can register to our newsletter. So we send out a newsletter every few months. We send other webinar updates as well through that newsletter. So that's definitely the best place. And we also have our LinkedIn pages as well. So if you look for Blockchain Supply Chain Association on LinkedIn, you'll certainly find us.
Marvelous, really, Eric. The point here is recently we went in a live doing education, and I was with Elcio Gracia, and someone asked the question, how blockchain can help supply chain. So that's my question. First of all, what is blockchain and how blockchain can support supply chain?
Great question, right? What is blockchain? Because again, cryptocurrencies is all we have in mind, but blockchain is actually a foundational technology. When we talk over the internet, when the internet talks to each other, there is a protocol behind that, right? That's TCP/IP. It's one of the most basic forms. Well, blockchain is just a technology layer that's right above. And if I'm going to simplify explaining blockchain or distributed ledger technology, blockchain is a record of transactions, right? In electronic form. When we think of a ledger, when we think of a record of transactions, I'll give you a great example. Your banking statement, right? Here in Canada, every month our bank sends us a record of all the transactions. I paid my mortgage, I purchased food, my credit card transactions, my withdrawals, my deposits. Hopefully you have more deposits than withdrawals on that statement, right? That's the whole point of accumulating a bit of money, but it is a record of transactions. Blockchain and DLT is exactly that, but with some very robust features around it. For one, it's an electronic form. It's not paper. In supply chain, we've been relying on paper for way too long. I think the pandemic showed us how important digitization was. I'm sure you've talked about digitization many times before on your show. So a digital form of a ledger. There is a principle around it as well that is decentralized or distributed. That's why we call it a distributed ledger technology. And what distributed means is that, for example, your bank, right? Your bank statement, your bank is a central entity that's controlling the information, right? Credit card, retailers, your money in, your money out. The bank is controlling that information. So if the bank wants to change something on your ledger, you know, there are some bad banks around the world sometimes, unfortunately. But if they want to change some information, they can, right? They can go change the information and keep all your money. And in another point, if the bank's server goes down for some reason, what can you do? Well, you can't take your money out anymore. You can't do your transactions. And that's a centralized model. What blockchain and DLT brings is a decentralized model. So I have a server, you have a server, and the 10 people that we do business with all have their servers, right? Which is somewhat typical in business. We all have our computer systems. Well, we all have that same copy of the ledger on it. So I have the same ledger that you do. And our computers talk to each other. So if I make a change, you see it instantaneously. And the other 10 people around us see it instantaneously. And that builds trust, because if I know that I'm changing something and that you'll see it right away, I want to make sure that I'm entering something that is trustworthy. And that's the power of a decentralized model, because we're all talking together at the same time, all sharing information to a common source of truth, right? And also from a digital standpoint, it is real time and it's not paper-based, so it is real time. And would we not benefit from real-time information in our supply chains? I think we would. So that's basically the principle of a distributed ledger. There's also the principle of a blockchain, which is a chain of blocks of information. Again, there's technology behind it, there's cryptography behind it, which makes it, you know, very secure, but that's not the point. The point is that in a chain of blocks of information, you have block number 1, which has certain information. You have block number 2, which you're adding maybe new information from a supply chain perspective, right? Block number 1 might have a purchase order and a quantity and a description. Block number 2 might have an adjustment to those descriptions or quantities. And then you're adding maybe in block number 3, transportation information. But you can audit the information through those blocks, because block number 3 has a copy of block number 2, which has a copy of block number 1, which makes it very immutable. So if you can't change block number 1, because the information is already in block number 3 or block number 10 or block number 100. You can make corrections to block 100. For example, if your quantity is changed, you can change that, but you still have a record of everything that's gone on before it.
Okay.
Right? So each of the blocks are tied together. And that is very powerful as well in a supply chain for traceability perspectives and auditability as well. So you can audit the information that's gone on before you.
Fine. That's great. Erik, let's do the following. We are finishing the first part of our conversation here. It's really a rich conversation we are having here. I would like to explore a bit more information regarding how we apply blockchain in supply chain. We know that there are a lot of things that we can do in supply chain, and you explained some of them. But now, let's grab a coffee and a glass of water. Let's do that. Erik, we want a fantastic conversation, a fantastic chat that we are having here, educating people regarding blockchain and its use and supply chain. But one question I think is very important, Erik, is that I think supply chain is still very traditional. So how do you think about that? And how is the way we can find to change this perspective?
Now, that's a fantastic question. So you're a supply chain professional. You understand that there are so many different parties involved in a global supply chain, right? You have a manufacturer, and you might have a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 manufacturer, for example, right? Our mobile phones, these are hundreds of different parts that come from hundreds of different suppliers across hundreds potentially of countries that are assembled into a final product. And that's often the case. Our clothes or even our food is processed and shipped and reprocessed, and it becomes something else. So supply chains today are very complex, but they are still very linear. So you have a buyer that purchases a product, will send a request to a seller, right? The seller might or might not be a manufacturer, so they might outsource manufacturing. Once the goods are finished, then they're typically shipped. 90% of the world's goods are moved by ocean, so they come from all over the world, moved in boats and containers, you name it, arrives at a port. Different government agencies might be involved, different parties at that port, right? You have the port operator, you have the terminal operator, you have trucking companies or rail companies. Then it might go to a distribution center, and then it might go to a store or a final user. But each of these parties, it is always relying on, for one, their data silo. So each of these parties have their own computer systems, and each of these parties are waiting for information to be provided by the party before them, right? The steamship line is waiting for information that comes potentially from the manufacturer. The manufacturer is waiting for information that's coming from the seller, and upstream, right? Or downstream, sorry. Always mix up those two. When the port arrives, the customs officer is waiting for the captain to come down with this big pile of paper, right? The bills of lading, because again, we're still using paper bills of lading in many countries, and he's waiting for the captain to come down and give the customs officer that pile of paper so he can stamp that and then give it to the trucking companies, who is then going to ship it to the final consignee. Again, waiting for information between all these different parties is an old-fashioned way, and that's why we mentioned, right, an old-fashioned way of transmitting information. we're still today relying on paper documents to move around the world in an age where everything is digital. And even if you're sending an email with a copy of a PDF document, for me, that's still very linear. Again, one party giving information to the next one, and one party sending it to the next party, who has to recreate that information in his or her computer system. So each of these data silos needs to be recreated at every step of the way, right? And that's why we say that today's supply chains are very complex, but still very linear.
Oh, what a great explanation here, Erik. There is a point I would like to ask you, Erik, regarding blockchain and its future. Normally, when we talk about blockchain, mainly here in Brazil, people are not confident about the subject because it was really very connected with Bitcoin in the past, and it involved a lot of technology. I think it's important to understand. But there are a lot of points or touch points that blockchain can solve. You mentioned the traceability, you mentioned the risk, and I would like to hear from you more explanations about that. But the other point that I would like to bring it to the conversation here is blockchain is just for big companies, or we can use blockchain for everybody. What do you think about that, Erik?
Blockchain is such an accessible technology. And yes, when a new technology comes into the market, it's always a bit more expensive in the beginning, right? When new technologies for televisions come, that first television, right, is very expensive. I mean, I think we're about the same age. You remember plasma televisions, right? Very expensive technologies in the beginning, and then it goes down and goes down and down and down in pricing. And it's the same for blockchain and DLT. Now you can go on Amazon Web Services and have a managed blockchain by Amazon, the same that we have our databases. And it makes it streamlined, because today maybe you're using EDI, right? If you're a bigger company, you're using EDI. But again, EDI is a 70-year-old technology. It was invented for the Second World War. And it's still the more robust digital technology that we're using, right? XML and those things, that's 40 years old. I think we're due for something new.
Oh, great. And you mentioned traceability as an important problem, or this is a kind of pen that mainly food and the drug companies have currently. So could you mention a bit about this, Erik?
So let's take food as an example, right? There are so many different types of food, and by types of foods, from a consumer standpoint, think of fair trade, right? Fair trade coffee, or organic food, right? In the environment, right? Green or dolphin-free fish. There are so many different categories, and consumers are expecting, they're more educated, they're more mature, they're expecting better quality food. But what proves to me that my food is organic or gluten-free or fair trade, except from maybe something on the packaging, right? What proves to me that that's true? Well, with blockchain, you can, again, we mentioned earlier, attaching blocks of information together, right? You can draw the picture of that supply chain and prove to the consumer, who might be scanning a QR code on the packaging, and you might be able to prove by showing portions of your supply chain. I'll give you a great example. So Unilever in Asia, and I think you come from Unilever, right? So you understand the company, very big company, right? They have companies around the world, and they manage a lot of food. Well, in Vietnam, they put a QR code in packets of Knorr soups. And by doing that, they're showing that the pork that they're using, one of the ingredients, is certified pork, which is very important for the consumer in Vietnam. It proves that it's good pork, it comes from a good farm, it's been inspected by the government, and they can show a copy of that inspection certificate, and they can show portions, and not everything, right? They can show portions of their supply chain to prove to the consumer that their ingredients are quality ingredients, and that builds consumer trust. So by linking the information and by showing to the consumers portions of that information, you can build a better brand, you can build consumer trust, and you can also prove to auditors, maybe, or government agencies that what you're saying is actually true.
Wow, wow. And we talk about retail because you mentioned the Amazon, and after that you mentioned the Unilever as well. I can see that also in the agriculture, we can use blockchain. Am I right?
Absolutely. It goes to the same thing, right? You're tracing from your farm all the way to your fork. So you can prove that what you're saying is true. We have a member who is a gluten intolerant, so he's allergic to certain ingredients, right? And for him, it's almost dangerous if the ingredients in the food that he's eating is not what the manufacturer is saying, right? And again, food goes through different transformations along the process. So if the ingredients that he's eating are not actually what the manufacturer says, he might have some serious health consequences. So by using blockchain, you can trace from the seed that goes into the fields through maybe all the chemicals or fertilizers that they use. Right? When it was transported, was it transported in the right manner? Was humidity controlled? Was temperature controlled? Was it shipped the right way to the right place? Then through its transformation process, was that done according to regulations? And again, all the way to the consumer, and you can prove to the consumer that what you say is actually true. And you have a lot of jurisdictions globally that are enforcing these laws now, right? Europe is saying, prove to me that you have food traceability. The United States, the FDA says, prove to me that you're tracing your ingredients. And for consumers, that's very important.
Wow, and this is great, Erik, because we know that in the chain we have a lot of players and the stakeholders. So we have to see and manage the whole chain, the whole value chain from the origin up to the consumer. Important what we are saying.
Right. So think of Unilever, think of big companies, right? Like maybe Walmart. They buy from maybe hundreds of different farms, and they're shipping to thousands of different parties. So if that one farm is having problem, right, with their ingredients, or there's a recall, using a paper method that takes maybe 1-2 weeks to trace back, well, the goods came from that farm and it went to that store. What does a retailer have to do? He has to take everything off the shelf, which is very expensive. But by using blockchain or digital means, they can trace back in seconds instead of days or weeks. And instead of pulling everything off the shelf, they can target a specific farm, a specific store in a matter of seconds or minutes, and just take those products off the shelf and not everything else.
Wow, fantastic, Erik. Erik, my friend, we are reaching the end of this fantastic conversation. Really,
I talk a lot. I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's the object. That's the aim that we have here to have this conversation and educate people in this fantastic subject, which is blockchain. And Erik, before finishing up the conversation, I would like to have some hints, some recommendation that you would have for the people regarding blockchain, how to implement the blockchain, and how to be even more confident about this initiative.
Well, it's exactly what you're doing, right? You're educating people. And that's all we ask for, is that people, supply chain professionals, understand the basic principles of blockchain technology. It's not about being able to code. I can't code to save my own life. I'm not a developer. You have very smart people who understand code, they can do it. But from a supply chain professional standpoint, understand how transformational it can be. It's digital, that's transformational for us. It's real-time information, that's very transformational for us. It's trusted information, that's very powerful as well. So understand how that can change the way that we do business today, right? From that linear supply chain to a more distributed real-time supply chain.
Wow, Eric, my friend, thank you very much for your presence here. Really a great contribution indeed. Eric, to infinity and beyond, my friend.
To infinity and beyond.
And what we do in life echoes in eternity. Bye-bye, my friend. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ao infinito e... Amém!